So I'm going to talk a little bit about the genesis of the film and how it came to be. So in 2006, I found out something that basically changed my life from that point forth. An old friend from college, from Boston University, was now moved to California, moved to LA, and he was practicing Falun Gong. And I didn't know anything about it, I wasn't that interested. But one day he told me that there was a persecution happening in China for people who practiced, and they were put in labor camps, used as a live donor bank, where their organs were harvested and the bodies once dead were burned. The going prices for a lung was $160,000, a heart $145,000. The atrocity that was happening across the globe to people I had no connection to a place I had never been. But at that moment, everything seemed to change for me when my heart just broke. And I was at that time painting erotic paintings, and everything changed. I stopped painting, and I had an opportunity to start working for Epoch Times, which Epoch Times' goal was to bring uncensored media to Chinese speakers. And I started covering documentary films, and I was the entertainment writer. And so I started to be able to interview filmmakers, and I was watching a ton of documentaries. They just became part of my life. And when I first heard about the persecution, my first thought was, what did these people do wrong that was, pissing off the Chinese government so much? And I realized my second thought was, oh, the Germans didn't really need too much of an excuse to, for the plan for genocide for the Jewish population. And I was raised Jewish, and I was sort of brought up to know about the Holocaust and educated about their different forms of propaganda that the Germans used, which are hauntingly similar to what the Chinese Communist Party was doing to Falun Gong. So I began to learn about Falun Gong, their beliefs, their practice, their meditation and Qigong exercises. And I started handing out flyers to educate people about the persecution. And I think hearing people and speaking to people, I really understood what people's reaction was, and I was able to, when I later made the movie, that was a big part of what, what led me to make the film. And I understood what people's concerns were and doubts. And some people their comments were, we have enough to worry about here, why worry about China? Or feelings of hopelessness. China is too powerful, we can't beat China, why bother? Or even someone like I met, a Reuters journalist who was stationed in China, and he was the most sorrowful, saying that their situation there was so bad, but we think that that the Chinese government censors their own people. We don't realize that the communist government is censoring our media as well. And they either pressure, bribe, and threaten networks and advertisers here to make sure that you don't know this story. And that's pretty much why you don't know the story. And they want to make sure you don't know that the Falun Gong prisoners of consciousness are given medical exams and blood tests before they're brought into the labor camps and brought into jail. And that those blood types are entered into a computer, and that anybody around the world who needs a new organ can just go call up China, and within 2 weeks they're promised a new organ. So, when I was writing for the arts paper, as an arts entertainment writer, I was asked at that point to speak at to report on a human rights rally that was happening in 2008. And I saw a woman who spoke there, who moved me deeply because she had such a sweet nature, and she shared her stories of torture with no anger and no blame. And then I was also that day able to interview a human rights lawyer named David Matus, who was a small-framed guy, and he was the one that actually brought attention to this whole story, because he was asked with David Kilgore, who's a parliament member, to investigate the story. In 2000, there were just allegations, there were rumors that this was happening, and David was asked to prove if it really was happening. And his book, Bloody Harvest, was actually nominated. That work that he did he was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize for in 2010. So I kept in touch with David Matus, and I was kind of blown away by his absolutely impossible itinerary of constant globe-trotting to defend victims all around the world, usually cases that no one else wants to bother with, too hard to prove, and he would take on those cases that no one else wanted. And he says in the film, and it's a long quote I'm going to read, but it's also very much related to my refugee practice because I'm a lawyer representing refugee claimants coming from around the world who have these stories of persecution which then have to be established before an administrative tribunal, and they don't have witnesses, they don't have documents, they don't have forensic proof, they just come with their stories. And he says, I was involved with Amnesty International and all sorts of human rights organizations, but these organizations do have research departments, but they're too simple research departments and not involved with sophisticated analytical research. And he said, I'm well used to dealing with this kind of evidentiary vacuum and trying to establish what happened. I've seen lots of burnout. I mean, people, they get either discouraged or blasé, or they just can't take it. My daily life is mass murder, torture, sexual abuse, and so on. He says, unless you approach this dispassionately, you won't be able to deal with it. And I feel that what I can contribute to this, to combat these problems, is analysis, professionalism, a kind of dispassionate approach, logic. There are lots of people who get upset and excited, and getting upset and excited isn't really going to help the issue at all. So when he became nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, I knew that this would be the right time to start this film. And I knew that there was nothing in the mainstream that told you about this issue. There were some other projects, there were some other films, but they were all kind of journalistic and nothing for the mainstream. So I kind of thought, well, maybe my background in art, and now that I, felt very comfortable in the documentary world, I thought this seemed like a good idea, and that seemed like a good idea for a very short while. And then all of a sudden I realized I had no funding, no money, never made a film, never went to film school. I really had no idea what I was doing. And at that moment, I really tracked back on the moment when I decided this was a good idea to make this film. And I actually tracked back to that moment, and I realized everything in my life led me to this moment. Everything was put exactly in place for me to do this at this moment. And when I realized that was the case, I never doubted again, and I went 1,000% with all my ability and then some to finish this film. And of course, as that happens, everything sort of magically would come to my aid to help me. From my friend Pete McGrain, who's the director of that monster doc, Ethos, became the editor and producer of this. Incredible musicians who donated their music, like the world-famous clarinet player, Georg Feidman, and inspiring doctors to change organ trafficking laws. And the woman who inspired me that day at the rally, Jana Bin Lee, I got her to speak for me in this movie. And Jana says in the film, although I experienced a lot, so much pain and so much torture, I do not regret. I think that using my own experience to let more people know about the truth, to awaken Chinese people who are not aware about the truth, I think it's worth it. We call everyone's attention to the persecution that's happening in China of Falun Gong practitioners because it's the most important thing today in the world. Why? Because you know what the Communist Party in China is doing. Because you know that the Communist Party in China is undermining the basis for the existence of human beings. What is Falun Gong? Falun Gong is a practice of truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. Without these principles, she says, the world has no future. And Mata seems to summarize the whole film when he basically urges everyone to do what you can. It doesn't matter if you write a letter, if you go to your government officials, if you just tell somebody, that's what you should do. And I felt like that was sort of what I did. I made a film. And the one thing that was really important to me when I made this film was that I showed the very worst of humanity, but I also wanted to show the very best of humanity. And the very worst of humanity being greed, cruelty, and selfishness, but the best of humanity being courage, compassion, and justice. And someone asked me in an interview if I had any final thoughts on the film, and I said, well, if I can make this film, I feel like what I really want to say to people, if I can make this film with no money, no experience, and no knowledge of anything, I learned everything as I went along, then certainly collectively as a society, with our intelligence and our creativity, we can solve this problem together. So thank you very much for your time.
Very powerful message. One more time for Masha. Thank you. Masha, where can people go to hear more about your film or watch your film?
Well, thank you. It's on Hulu right now.
On Hulu right now?
Free, so make sure you don't pay for it. And I have some DVDs here if you want to buy it tonight. And there's a website and a Facebook page. So like the Facebook page.
Great. Thank you.